In the early 1900s, the world was experiencing a golden age of botanical exploration. Scientists traveled to remote corners of the earth, documenting new species and expanding our understanding of the natural world. These expeditions produced thousands of carefully catalogued specimens and photographs, each one a window into the planet's incredible biodiversity. Most of these scientific records were routine, methodical documentation of flora that would sit quietly in archives for decades, but sometimes, hidden within these seemingly ordinary photographs, lay secrets that would take over a century to uncover. This is the story of one such photograph taken in 1901 that revealed a biological impossibility so terrifying that it challenges everything we thought we knew about the natural world. Dr. Evelyn Reed had always found comfort in the systematic nature of archival work. As a digital preservation specialist at the Natural History Museum, she spent her days converting century-old photographs and documents into high-resolution digital files. It was methodical, peaceful work that allowed her to glimpse into the past while contributing to the preservation of scientific knowledge. In the spring of 2023, she was assigned a particularly exciting project, digitizing the complete collection of Dr. Alastair Finch, a celebrated botanist whose 1901 South Pacific expedition had yielded dozens of previously unknown plant species. The Finch collection had been stored in climate-controlled vaults for over 100 years, and Dr. Reed was among the first researchers to examine many of these materials since they were originally archived. The collection contained hundreds of glass plate photographs, press specimens, and detailed field notes from what was considered one of the most successful botanical expeditions of the early 20th century. Finch had spent 6 months exploring a chain of uncharted islands, discovering numerous new species that expanded the scientific understanding of tropical flora. On a quiet Tuesday morning, Dr. Reed carefully placed glass plate number F147 onto her scanning equipment. The photograph showed a single flower, elegant and striking against a neutral background. According to Finch's accompanying notes, this was Orchis vigilia, which he had nicknamed the Sentinel Orchid. The flower was breathtaking, with deep violet petals that seemed to shimmer even in the century-old photograph. Its center displayed an intricate pattern of lighter purple markings that created an almost geometric design across the main petal. The scanning process was routine. Dr. Reed had digitized thousands of similar botanical photographs over the years. But as the high-resolution image appeared on her computer screen, something caught her attention. When she zoomed in on the flower's central petal to check for image quality, she noticed something peculiar about those geometric markings. They weren't random patterns at all. They looked remarkably like a pair of eyes, complete with what appeared to be pupils and irises. Dr. Reed blinked and leaned back from her monitor. It had to be pareidolia, the human tendency to see faces and familiar shapes in random patterns. She had seen similar optical illusions countless times in her work, but curiosity got the better of her. Dr. Reed decided to run the image through advanced pattern recognition software, the same technology used to analyze satellite imagery and medical scans. The results appeared on her screen within minutes, and what she saw made her stomach drop. The software had identified the markings as complex ocular structures with characteristics matching vertebrate eyes. The analysis showed distinct corneal layers, lens formations, and even what appeared to be neural pathways extending from the back of each eye-like structure into the flower's stem. This was impossible. Plants do not have eyes. They do not have nervous systems capable of processing visual information. Yet, here was a computer analysis suggesting that this 1901 photograph showed a flower with functional vertebrate eyes embedded in its petals. Dr. Reed ran the analysis 3 more times, adjusting parameters and using different software programs. Every result came back the same. What she was looking at violated every known law of biology. Her routine archival project had suddenly become an obsession. Dr. Reed knew she needed to learn more about this expedition and what Dr. Finch had actually discovered on that remote South Pacific island. She requested access to Finch's personal field journals, documents that had been sealed in the museum's rare manuscript collection since his death in 1902. The archive storage room felt different that evening as Doctor. Reed opened the climate-controlled case containing Finch's expedition journal. The leather-bound book was remarkably well preserved, its pages still crisp despite being over 120 years old. She carefully opened to the first entry, dated March 15th, 1901, written in Finch's precise handwriting as his ship approached the uncharted island chain he would later name the Vigilia Archipelago. The early entries read exactly as Doctor. Reed expected from a professional botanist of that era. Finch documented weather conditions, soil compositions, and preliminary observations about the island's ecosystem. His writing was clinical and enthusiastic, filled with the measured excitement of a scientist encountering new discoveries. He cataloged dozens of new plant species with meticulous detail, noting their characteristics, growing conditions, and potential scientific significance. Then, on April 3rd, in 1901, Finch wrote about discovering the sentinel orchid in a secluded grove near the island's volcanic center. His description matched the photograph perfectly. Violet petals with intricate central markings, growing in clusters of 3 to 5 flowers per stem. He noted that the local island inhabitants seemed to avoid this particular grove, though they were otherwise helpful guides for his botanical surveys. But something changed in Finch's writing after that discovery. Dr. Reed noticed it immediately as she turned to the next page. The handwriting became less precise, more hurried. The clinical tone gave way to something else entirely. On April 7th, just 4 days after discovering the orchid, Finch wrote about feeling constantly observed during his work. He described an overwhelming sensation of being watched, particularly when he was near the grove where the sentinel orchids grew, or as Dr. Reed continued reading, Finch's journal entries became increasingly disturbing. He wrote about the flower's central markings with growing unease, describing how they seemed to follow his movements as he worked. Initially, he dismissed these observations as fatigue-induced hallucinations brought on by months of fieldwork in tropical conditions. But his certainty began to waver as the feeling of being watched intensified. On April 12th, Finch made an entry that sent chills down Dr. Reed's spine. He wrote about conducting a careful examination of the orchid's markings through his magnifying glass and being horrified to discover that they were indeed eye-like structures, complete with what appeared to be pupils that dilated and contracted in response to light. More disturbing still, he was convinced that these eyes were tracking his movements with an intelligence that seemed utterly alien. Finch's scientific training warred with what he was observing. His journal entries from this period showed a man desperately trying to rationalize the impossible. He theorized about convergent evolution, about unknown symbiotic relationships between plants and animals, about any possible scientific explanation for what he was witnessing. But each theory fell apart under closer examination, and his growing fear became evident in every line of increasingly frantic handwriting. The most disturbing entry came on April 18th, when Finch decided to resolve the mystery through direct investigation. He wrote about his plan to carefully dissect one of the orchid specimens to understand its true nature. Dr. Reed found herself holding her breath as she read his detailed description of approaching the flower with his botanical instruments, prepared to make precise cuts that would reveal the internal structure of the eye-like markings. But as Finch positioned his scalpel above the flower's central petal, something extraordinary and terrifying happened. He wrote that the pupils of the eye-like structures suddenly dilated wide, and a low, almost subsonic humming sound filled the grove. Before he could make his first incision, a tendril-like appendage emerged from the base of the plant with lightning speed, striking his forearm and leaving behind what he described as a strange, crystalline rash that seemed to sparkle in the sunlight. Terrified and in pain, Finch dropped his instruments and fled the grove. His final journal entries from the island were brief and desperate. He wrote about the rash spreading up his arm, about vivid nightmares of being watched by countless eyes, and about his growing conviction that the sentinel orchid was not just a plant, but something far more sinister. His last entry before leaving the island was a single sentence written in shaky handwriting. "The flower is a lure, and I fear I have become the prey." Finch abandoned his expedition immediately, leaving behind most of his collected specimens in his haste to depart the island. His final notes warned future researchers to avoid the Vigilia archipelago entirely, describing the sentinel orchid as a dangerous organism that posed an unknown threat to human life. Dr. Reed sat back in her chair, trying to process what she had just read. The journal entries painted a picture of a respected scientist slowly descending into what appeared to be madness, yet his descriptions were too detailed and consistent to dismiss entirely. She needed to know what happened to Alistair Finch after he returned from his expedition. Official records showed that Dr. Finch died in London on November 23rd, 1902, less than 2 years after returning from the South Pacific. The cause of death was listed as tropical fever, a common fate for explorers of that era who contracted diseases during their travels. But Dr. Reed's experience with historical research had taught her that official records rarely told the complete story. She spent the next week tracking down Dr. Finch's personal physician, a doctor, Marcus Whitmore, who had maintained extensive private case files. These files, she discovered, had been donated to the London School of Medicine's historical archive decades earlier. Through professional connections, Dr. Reed was able to access Dr. Whitmore's confidential notes about his treatment of Alistair Finch. What she found in those medical records was far more disturbing than any tropical fever. Dr. Whitmore's notes described a patient suffering from progressive symptoms that defied medical explanation. The crystalline rash that had first appeared on Finch's arm during his island expedition had continued to spread across his body over the course of 18 months. Whitmore described the affected skin as taking on an almost translucent, gem-like quality that seemed to emit a faint luminescence in darkened rooms. More troubling were the neurological symptoms. Finch experienced episodes of complete paralysis that would last for hours, during which he remained fully conscious but unable to move or speak. During these episodes, Whitmore noted, the patient's eyes would remain wide open, staring fixedly at nothing. When the paralysis ended, Finch would speak frantically about feeling watched, about eyes observing him from every surface in the room. Dr. Whitmore's final notes, written just days before Finch's death, described his patient's conviction that something had followed him back from the island. Finch insisted that the organism was patient, intelligent, and had been studying him throughout his illness. His last coherent words, according to Whitmore, were a warning that the creature was learning to wear human faces. The medical records confirmed Dr. Reed's growing suspicion. Whatever Alistair Finch had encountered on that remote island in 1901 had fundamentally changed him. The official cause of death might have been listed as tropical fever, but the truth was far stranger and more frightening. Dr. Reed realized there was one more avenue to explore. According to Finch's expedition records, he had managed to bring back several specimens from his South Pacific journey before abandoning the rest. These specimens had been donated to various institutions after his death, treated as valuable additions to botanical collections around the world. She needed to find out what had happened to the sentinel orchid samples. After days of searching through donation records and institutional transfers, Dr. Reed discovered that one sealed specimen case containing samples of Orchis vigilia had been gifted to the Royal Botanical Conservatory in 1903. The conservatory, she learned, still maintained those specimens in a specialized climate-controlled biodome designed for rare and exotic plants. The conservatory's website proudly featured the sentinel orchid as one of its most prized specimens, describing it as an extremely rare flower that had been successfully cultivated for over a century. Visitors could view the orchids through specially designed observation windows, though direct access to the biodome was restricted to senior staff members only. Dr. Reed browsed through the conservatory's online photograph gallery, looking for recent images of the orchids. What she found made her blood run cold. The most recent photograph, taken just 6 months earlier with high-definition digital equipment, showed the sentinel orchids in perfect clarity. And there, unmistakably visible in the center of each bloom, were the eyes. But this time, when Dr. Reed zoomed in on the image for a closer look, she noticed something that made her heart race. In the reflection of one perfectly rendered pupil, barely visible but undeniably present, was the silhouette of the photographer who had taken the picture. The eye was not just seeing, it was recording. It had been watching and remembering every person who had approached it for over 100 years. Dr. Reed's hands trembled as she realized the full implications of her discovery. The conservatory's visitor logs showed thousands of people who had viewed the sentinel orchids over the decades. Scientists, students, tourists, and dignitaries from around the world had stood before those observation windows, unknowingly being catalogued by an alien intelligence. The organism had been building a comprehensive database of human behavior, studying our movements, our reactions, our very essence, she thought about Dr. Whitmore's final notes about Finch's warning that the creature was learning to wear human faces. What if the paralysis episodes weren't just symptoms of infection? What if they were something far more sinister? What if the organism had been using Finch as a test subject, learning how to mimic human behavior by controlling his body during those terrifying episodes? Dr. Reed realized with growing horror that the sentinel orchid's presence in botanical collections worldwide might not be coincidence. The conservatory's records showed that cuttings and seeds from their specimens had been shared with partner institutions across 6 continents. The organism had successfully spread itself across the globe under the protection of the scientific community itself. The 1901 photograph had been more than a scientific discovery. It had been a warning that went unheeded for more than a century. An ancient, patient intelligence had been living among us, hiding in plain sight in botanical collections and conservatories around the world. It had been watching, learning, and waiting. And now, after all this time, Dr. Reed realized that it might finally be ready to reveal its true purpose. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to subscribe for more secrets that history tried to hide. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching.